On today's video, we're going to be comparing incomes by race in the state of Florida to give you guys a picture of the situation with equality throughout the state. And I'm going to be honest, some of the things I've discovered while making this video are nothing less than disturbing. I mean, for one, whites in Florida make exactly the same amount of money as whites in Alabama, but housing in Florida can typically cost as much as twice more. Notice how much they disadvantage their black population in comparison. I want to start off by comparing Florida to other places. Notice how badly African Americans are faring in Memphis, Tennessee, predominantly an African American city. Birmingham, Alabama is almost 80% African American, yet despite being the majority, they are seriously disadvantaged economically. African Americans are still, even in the city of Atlanta, earning considerably less than other races. Jacksonville and St. Petersburg are the two areas in Florida that have predominantly African American communities that are large. You would think that in these cities, African Americans would control a sector of the economy to be able to provide somewhat equal income. Not the case. Both Jacksonville and St. Pete are struggling to provide for their African American communities. Now, there's a variable here that you may not have thought about, and many of the people have their properties already paid off, which means that the people that are Hispanic in those cities are going to have to make more money because they're going to be paying rent or mortgages. So there's a lot of variables you're going to have to hold into account when you look at these analytics for the state of Florida. Compare Fort Myers to Cape Coral. These are the same metropolitan areas, but African Americans in Fort Myers are struggling, while African Americans in Cape Coral are doing much better. In fact, African Americans in Cape Coral are making about as much as white families. But there's a problem. The African American population in Cape Coral was imported from states like Connecticut and New York, and in Fort Myers, the African American population is native to the area. So this information doesn't exactly suggest that the Fort Myers area is going to be successful for African Americans. It just suggests that a lot of African Americans with money from other parts of the country moved to the Cape Coral Fort Myers area. And you're going to find that a lot of the people in Fort Myers that are affluent and African American are usually going to come from other states like Connecticut, New York, or Virginia. So as we look at these analytics, we're not just going to say a place is good for a particular race. We're going to try to understand exactly why these analytics are showing these numbers. So yes, on paper, it may look like Cape Coral is a better place for African Americans because they have almost the same income as whites. But you have to consider these African Americans came to Cape Coral from somewhere else with money. If they had been from the Fort Myers, Cape Coral area, chances are they would be in poverty. So where are African Americans doing better in Florida? Estero, Florida is a suburb of Fort Myers, and the African American community here is averaging over $140,000. That's about 7 times higher than a regular family in the city of Fort Myers. But you're not talking about hundreds of African Americans living good in Estero. It's 0.64% African American. Nonetheless, it's still interesting that today in Estero, Florida, African Americans are making considerably more than whites. In adjacent Bonita Springs, Florida, African Americans are also the highest earning group, but African Americans are less than 1% of the population in Bonita Springs. A lot of African Americans from Memphis, Atlanta, and other parts of the Deep South with money are starting to move to Florida. Meanwhile, the established African American communities in Florida are not doing too well. Parrish, Florida is a suburb outside of Tampa, close to Sarasota and Bradenton. African Americans here are now the top earners. Riverview is a suburb in this side of Tampa as well, and it also has pretty good equality with most races making about the same and everybody making above the state average. However, when you look at the city of Tampa, the white population is way off the charts, making significantly more money than everybody else. But if you are a minority and you are in a wealthy, affluent suburb on the outskirts of the city, chances are you're doing pretty well. If we can conclude anything from these analytics, it's possibly that minorities like African Americans and Hispanics prefer to live in the outer outskirts once they have obtained more income. Sun City Center is another suburb on the east side of Tampa, and here African Americans as well are making pretty good money, significantly more than all other races. So we can safely assume that at least in the southwest side of Florida, any suburban area that's affluent is going to have really well-to-do African Americans, who in many cases are making significantly more money than their white neighbors. And it's not just Southwest Florida. In the Florida Panhandle, places like Panama City Beach that are tourist towns, both African Americans and Hispanics are starting to make more than whites. The city of Venice, Florida, at some point attracted affluent African Americans and Hispanics, and it seems like they either left or stopped making income. It's also possible that as those populations grew, high-income earners became a smaller percentage of the population. And it seems like places like Palm Beach Gardens, regardless of your race, everybody makes above the state average, with Hispanics currently having the highest. Disturbingly bad is how African Americans are doing in places like Pensacola. Horrendous situation in Titusville, Florida for African Americans. They actually had a reduction in income. Compare it to Lehigh Acres, where African Americans are making almost as much as whites. When you get back closer to West Palm Beach, things change drastically. African Americans in Jupiter are the top earners by race. Port St. Lucie is possibly the most equal city in the entire state of Florida, where every single race makes about what the average white person would make in Florida. So when it comes to racial equality, it seems like Port St. Lucie is really the poster child for what Florida should be. Let's take a look at some of these towns that really have a problem. In Naples, Florida, Hispanics actually started to make less money. As the white income was increasing, Hispanics started to make even less than what they were already making. Now, I lived in Naples during this time period, and if you watch my first YouTube videos, I was very upset at what was going on in Naples in that time period. It was like they were purposely trying to force Hispanics to leave the city. Exactly what the crap I was living through. Let's take a look at what I said during that video. This was the first viral video that I ever made for this channel. They think because they have a little bit of money, they're better than you. As soon as I stepped into the school system in Collier County, in the schools, young children were already discriminating me based on the fact that I wasn't rich like them. And they've grown up, now they're adults, and now they really think they're better than you. And the people that have come down from other states, New York, Colorado, they have really brought this mindset with them that they are better. You have to dress a certain way just to have employment, and I have just gotten sick and tired of discrimination, and they complain about how hard it is to get people to work for them. Well, if you pay them right, it's not a problem to work for you. The problem is people have kind of gotten used to treating people like servants. That right there was the video that blew up my channel, and that segment of the video where I exposed the racial economic discrimination that was going on in Naples at that time was really what lit the flame to that video that got 400,000 views in a short period of time and led to my YouTube channel just blowing up. So those people down there, they absolutely hate me because not only did I expose the problem, I encourage Hispanic people to leave the city of Naples if they're going to get treated that way. I moved out of Naples, and now we have analytics to prove that all this wasn't some lie I made up. It's factual, it's analytical, it's statistical. I can't even go to Naples to see my dad. I go to Naples, the cops are pulling me over. I think the last time I was down there, I got pulled over, and between court fees and tickets was like $800. Anyways, they weren't too happy for me exposing the truth about what they were doing. And basically the same thing in that same time period that they did to Hispanics in Naples, they were doing the same exact thing to black people in Ocala. This is part of gentrification, of forcing people out by making sure that they make less income. I recently made a video about the best and the worst places for African Americans in Florida. And on that video, I mentioned that I thought Ocala was a really bad place for African Americans, but that was just my opinion. Again, now we have analytics to show you exactly what I was talking about. There's no reason for a particular race's income to go down as housing cost is going up. That's absolutely abnormal, and it's almost something that's created on purpose. That doesn't just happen by chance. People don't just all of a sudden start making less money as everybody else is making more money. As things become more expensive, all of a sudden now you're also making less money. That just doesn't make any sense. Shake my head, Ocala, Florida. You know, Lehigh Acres is surprisingly equal poverty for everybody. We can all be poor together in Lehigh Acres, Florida. Not only is Gainesville, Florida as racist as Ocala, but it's actually even poorer. And surprisingly, a lot of people think that simply because Gainesville is more diverse, that it's equal, not analytically. Everybody assumes just because these are college towns and there's a lot of diversity that things are right here. That doesn't mean anything. I've never really been impressed by neither one of these cities. Have you ever thought about what could possibly be worse than Lehigh Acres? Yeah, Lakeland, Florida. Look at how bad they treat their African American people here. You can see how the population's income just kind of sagged and dragged along for blacks. That's horrible. But people love good old Polk County, Florida. Just go ahead and put a R behind the Po and make it poor. The R represents racist. And using Lehigh Acres as a middle ground metric, look at how messed up Jacksonville is. You can see that their white people are just doing fine up there with good income, but then the black population is just like sketching the bottom of what's even humanly possible when it comes to incomes. Talking about horrendous things happening to black people in Florida, look at the town of Brooksville. You can see a clear drop in income for black people in Brooksville, Florida. However, all of a sudden Hispanics got rich there in the last year. That right there is Cubans and Puerto Ricans moving from places like Miami and Orlando to buy up all the affordable real estate, start businesses. Didn't originate in Brooksville, it originated in places like Miami and Orlando. Don't think that all of a sudden Brooksville decided, oh, let's just take care of our Hispanic people all of a sudden. No, this is people from Miami moving in. And notice as that population moved in, how it just economically dwarfed everybody that was there already before them. But it's crazy how a place that on paper is even poorer than Lehigh Acres. I mean, if you compare it to Lehigh Acres, it has less income than Lehigh. But then a bunch of people move in from Miami and they start making a crap load of money, which is what I've been telling you guys for a while, that a lot of these quote unquote poor places in America, they're not poor because there's no opportunities in these communities. They're poor because the people just don't want to get off their butts and work. It's exactly the same thing that I found when I moved to rural Alabama, where all the locals were complaining about, we're not getting paid enough. It's so hard to make a living. No, it's not. It's actually a very easy place to make a living. Notice how the Hispanics that were there before were already comfortable in that poverty as well. So don't take this as a racial thing. It's a Miami hustle. It's a big city hustle. It's a mentality of people moving somewhere to be successful versus somebody who's comfortable in their environment. Bartow, Florida is the county seat for Polk County. Notice how the Hispanic population just kind of gave up on life there. Whatever's going on economically in Bartow, Florida does not look good. Blacks and Hispanics making less, whites making a lot more. Economically, there's some troubles in Polk County, Florida. Could possibly be racially motivated. This is definitely bad stuff. Here's an interesting statistic. In Citrus County, Florida, blacks are making more than whites. That's definitely interesting because this is a predominantly white and rural county with a large elderly population. But notice that the white incomes are actually very low, possibly because people here are retired. Notice how Montgomery, Alabama compares to Lehigh Acres, Florida. You can see that the black population in Montgomery is the absolute bottom, but the white population in Montgomery is absolutely over the top. Means that whites in Montgomery, Alabama make a lot more than whites in Lehigh Acres. That's interesting because in Montgomery, Alabama, African Americans are the majority, but as you can see, economically, they're right along the bottom, and the white population in Montgomery far surpasses the Lehigh Acres population in income. And this has led to a lot of whites that are poor in South Florida moving further north in the states like South Carolina or Alabama because they're going to make more income, they're going to pay less for housing, and this is definitely a trend that's been happening in Florida for years. And it's interesting that the white population that's poor has the option to move somewhere where their economical prospects are just going to be guaranteed to be better. You would think that'd be the case for Miami for Hispanics? Not really. Notice how Hispanics actually make a little bit more money in Tampa than they do in Miami. However, housing in Tampa is significantly cheaper than Miami. It really means that Hispanics have to work twice as hard to make the same amount of money and then pay twice as much for the same thing, which means you're working 4 times harder to get the same thing as somebody else. I consider this a type of secret slavery that Hispanics and blacks are facing in America. Not all blacks in all places. Take Montgomery, Alabama. It's very affordable in the black area, so that doesn't really equate to a good example. But take Hispanic communities that have to work harder to buy the same exact house, pay more for the house, all while getting paid less. It just seems like a racism tax where, yeah, you can have these same things we got, but you're going to have to work 4 times harder for it. You're getting paid less, you're working harder, and the house that you go to buy costs 4 times more. That's the all-inclusive American racism tax, which affects African American communities as well to a smaller degree, like when paying for services like Uber in a bad neighborhood. It may be more expensive because nobody wants to take those rides. But basically, the disadvantage that Hispanic communities have is that you're gonna get paid less, you're gonna have to work harder, and then when you go to buy something, it's gonna cost 4 times more than somewhere else. So while racism in places like Alabama is aimed at holding down some segments of the population like blacks, in the state of Florida, it's not so much holding Hispanics down, it's just as they try to climb up the economical ladder, it becomes more difficult. It's not so much like you're being drowned economically as it is that you have a 100-pound bag of sand tied to your foot that doesn't let you move faster. Now here's an absolutely interesting thing that I discovered about small places in South Florida. In Immokalee, Florida, you can see how the Hispanic and the white population correlate perfectly, even taking the same turns at the same time. And to be fair, African Americans are not that far behind. It seems like in South Florida, especially rural, poor places, there's this thing where Hispanic and white equal the same, and black isn't too far behind. It's not perfectly equal the way it should be, but it's not this monstrous difference between race groups. So we saw how in the more affluent areas like Naples, coastal communities like that are very discriminatory. However, when you go to like normal areas where normal people live in South Florida, they are not like that. I just find it really interesting that these small rural towns in South Florida can accomplish the same type of equality that you'll find in a place like Port St. Lucie. Take Hialeah, Florida. While below the state average, it is a poor place, an expensive place to buy a home as well. Very densely populated and expensive. But nonetheless, in Hialeah, Florida, doesn't matter if you're white, black, or Hispanic, everybody makes about the same. In poverty, of course. Now, I've had a lot of people on my channel, especially African Americans, tell me that Cubans are very racist against black. And while that's definitely true in the city of Miami, it isn't the case in Hialeah, which is a predominantly Cuban area. Once you're within that bubble of just Cubans, it's actually very equal. And this is a place where the Hispanics completely control the labor force. But they haven't used that power to ensure that other races can't get ahead. However, when you look at Miami, you can see that blacks here are seriously disadvantaged and that Hispanics don't make as much as whites. And many whites who leave Miami say they left Miami because Hispanics are taking the place over and running it. Well, not exactly. It's not as, it's almost like they're running away from equality more than they are from oppression. You guys catch that? where some people consider equality oppression simply because they can't have that massive advantage anymore. We've seen a lot of whites flee South Florida claiming oppression, claiming racism, when really it's just the white line becoming closer to everybody else. In other words, as soon as it starts to become equal, they think they're being oppressed, or they label it that way. It's their perception. This is a fine example of what we call white privilege, where people equate almost having equality to oppression. Notice how in Arcadia, Florida, which is also part of rural South Florida, Hispanic and white equal just about the same, but the black population there is far behind. And this is a conversation I've had with a lot of people, where in South Florida, race really isn't that big of a problem. Look at Opelika, Florida, where Hispanic and white are identical, taking the same turns economically year after year, and black people are in the mix as well. It seems like in South Florida, race really doesn't matter, despite the fact we're all poor down here. What I've been trying to tell you guys for a while, and I've had no way of absolutely proving it, I've been trying to tell you guys this forever, that in South Florida, we're just not like that. From Opelika to Hialeah to Immokalee to Arcadia to LaBelle, all these towns down here, we're not really like that. With the exceptions of getting into a place like Naples or Miami, where you have more money, and then you have people that are trying to control those sectors of the economy. But then again, those are the people that are from here. When you start getting into the people that come from other places, then it just kind of mixes things up in a bad way. I'm not trying to say that there's any type of regionalism on my part, but these are clear analytic indicators that show that both the South and the North have bigger racism problems than we do in South Florida when you look at the native populations. When you get to places like Naples, where everybody that's there came from somewhere else, you can definitely create a problem that's not inherently local to the area. And again, we're not talking about the 60s or the 70s. We have places like Estero and Bonita Springs that are 98% white at some time, and now they're just starting to get a little bit of diversity in. We're talking like currently in the year 2023. We're not going back in the time here. When you look at North Florida, though, places like Tallahassee, the black population makes significantly less than the state average, and the Hispanic population is also making less than the state average. I guess out of all these analytics, what baffled me the most is the fact that in Miami, black people are even poorer than blacks in Birmingham. That is just hard to wrap my head around. I mean, for one, housing in Miami costs about 10 times more than Birmingham when you look at affordable houses. So you're making far less money than you would in Birmingham, but you're expected to come up with 10 times more money to buy a house. But let's be clear that there's a difference between Miami and Cubans. Cubans was Hialeah, and we saw that in Hialeah, everybody's about the same in poverty. But then look at how much money white people are making in Birmingham, Alabama. Guys, white people in Birmingham, Alabama are making more money than white people in Miami, and the white areas in Miami are pretty affluent. So we can conclude from this that white people have made themselves very comfortable in Alabama, even in cities that are almost 80% black. And how blacks are being treated in Miami is just about atrocious. But keep in mind that the black population in Miami includes Haitians, which are new arrivals. To be honest, neither Miami nor Birmingham look like places of equality on paper. So I'm saying that a small country town like Citrus County, despite their countless rebel flags, is actually less economically racist than a place like Miami? Absolutely, but you have to understand that in Miami, the white population is a strong economical sector, and in a place like Citrus County, they're simply not. Sure, a place can have racist sentiments, but if they're not able to transfer that into economical oppression, it really doesn't affect the lives of those people that are victims. I know some of you guys are going to have a very hard time understanding that. But anyways, the goal of this video isn't to highlight racism, it's just to illustrate to you how in different places you can have different economical outlooks. Take the Miami suburb of Miramar. A lot of African Americans consider this a great place to live. Everybody here makes above the state average economically. However, while Hispanic and white are almost equal, black are still further behind. Above the state average, granted, but still behind Hispanics and whites. This is good clarification because I always thought this was a suburb of wealthy African Americans. Well, yeah, they're above the average for the state of all races, but they're still behind Hispanics and whites that live in the same community. So it's good, but it's not equal. But it is a larger community. Like those places like Bonita Springs and Estero, they're only a minority of a minority there. Parkland, Florida, which is also a suburb of the Miami Broward metropolitan area, seems like a little bit more fair. Everybody here is making far above the state average. With fluctuations, it's about fair for everybody. So we can go ahead and dispel the myth that there aren't places where African Americans aren't being treated right. No, there are plenty of places, at least in South Florida, where African Americans can be a normal person like anybody else. And that makes me really happy to say that. Now, for the northern half of the state, unfortunately, that claim cannot be made, with a few exceptions like Panama City Beach. But obviously, we know if you move to a place like that, yeah, these are tourist towns. They're not real communities. Whoa, don't stop typing Panama City Beach. I know you're a community, but you're still a tourist town. Relax, calm down. Another abnormality that I found is it seems like Sarasota is better for Hispanics than Tampa. It's like a little trap of all Hispanic people rushing to these bigger cities thinking they're going to be better off. Not exactly. Manatee County, where I live in currently, doesn't look too messed up, where a black person in Manatee County makes more than a white person in Henry. Alright guys, I hope you guys have learned a lot during this video. I sure did. This has been one of the most insightful videos that I have done where I have learned a lot. And it does seem like there are great places in South Florida where everybody's treated the same. These are clean, safe communities, suburban areas with lots of shopping and things to do. Alright guys, I learned a lot. What did you learn in this video, or what really struck you about this video?